Hi everybody, Matt back with you. Hope you're okay. Different kind of video for the channel today. We're not looking specifically at a location, we're looking at a story. A story from 40 years ago this week. On the 7th of July 1984, a young man was attacked with his boyfriend in Bangor, Maine in America. The youths assaulted him, chased him, and eventually threw him into the river to his death. The story of that young man inspired the greatest horror writer of all time and a nation to try and improve. This is the story of Charlie Howard. Charlie Howard was born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in January 1961. He was a small, thin, blonde-haired man, and he was also openly gay from a young age. He was bullied in school due to his sexual orientation, and he didn't even attend his own graduation ceremony. This was to save his family from seeing the bullying that he may have probably received whilst he was up there receiving his certificate. Charlie arrived in Bangor in January 1984, aged 23 years old. He moved in with two friends called Scott and Paul. He couldn't find work and his friends persuaded him to return home, but when he was at home he wasn't accepted. His stepfather didn't accept his sexuality. So after hearing on the phone how sad Charlie was, Scott and Paul invited him back to initially live with them. Charlie became a member of the local Unitarian church who accepted him, as did a support group in Bangor, an LGBT support group at the time. Sounds quite rare, doesn't it? But here were places that he felt accepted, and he soon left the home of Scott and Paul and got a flat near to where the church was. Charlie was out and proud at a time that could be very difficult for homosexuals depending on where in the world you are. Don't forget, in the UK back in 1984, Elton John, for example, had to marry a woman to still be accepted. It was a very different time, and certainly very difficult if you happened to be in a small town in America where such things just were still taboo subjects. But Charlie would go around wearing over-the-top flamboyant clothes. He'd wear women's accessories and jewellery, and would quite often be seen walking around singing from La Cage aux Folles, I Am What I Am. He was quite happy in his own skin, but unfortunately in Bangor, Maine, his life was not accepted by the community. So throughout 1984, poor Charlie was subjected to numerous attacks of what we call homophobia. There were no gay bars or nightclubs in Bangor, Maine at the time, and so Charlie had to go to what I suppose we would call it a straight nightclub and did end up dancing with a man and was forcibly asked to leave for doing so. One day he was shopping on the market stall near his house, and a woman, I presume just looking at the way he was dressed, started verbally assaulting him, calling him queer. Charlie initially decided to run from the scene, but bravely turned round and blew a kiss to the woman as he left. Unfortunately for Charlie, the next day he opened his door to leave his house, and on his doorstep he found the body of his cat, strangled. Charlie continued to receive verbal assaults and threats and intimidation throughout his life, and he started to realise this was the norm. This is how life was going to be. But he was incredibly brave, and he decided that he would still be the Charlie Howard he wanted to be. It was indeed a very incredibly brave move back then. Now, if you watch my channel quite a lot, you will see that I dress somewhat differently to other people. 30 years ago, I used to dress like this, and I even went to school dressed like this. But I received all sorts of intimidation as well, and I became the beige monster soon after, having to fit in. Charlie didn't have those fears. He just carried on. And he even managed to find himself a boyfriend called Roy. Things seemed to be going okay, because he accepted this as a way of life. There was no point reporting things to the police, they just ignored things like this at the time. We've seen in other videos on this channel where that kind of activity is the norm for the police. However, things came to a tragic end for Charlie on the 7th of July 1984. So on the night of the 6th into the 7th of July, Charlie was walking near his home with his boyfriend Roy Ogden, walking down a street. Three teenagers, Sean Mabry, age 16, James Baines, age 15, and Daniel Ness, age 17, pulled up in a car after buying alcohol illegally with some girls in the car. They got out and headed towards Charlie and Roy. They started harassing them. The harassment later turned to physical assault. Charlie and Roy started to run away, but the boys followed. And remember, Charlie suffered badly with asthma and was easily caught by the boys, who started kicking and punching him. Charlie's asthma flared up and he started to panic. The boys decided for some reason that they would lift Charlie up and throw him over a bridge into the river. They were on the State Street Bridge. Charlie pleaded for his life and clung on to the railings as hard as he could, but the boys prized his fingers off and threw Charlie into the darkness of the water. Roy had run for help and managed to raise an alarm, and soon police cars, etc., descended upon the scene. But it was at 1 AM on the 7th of July that Charlie's body was pulled from the water. One of the most famous residents of Bangor, Maine is an author who writes his stories from Derry, Maine, and that is horror author Stephen King. And the events of Charlie's death affected him terribly, along with the rest of Bangor, Maine, who seemed to be spurred into action to ensure this kind of event did not happen again. 2 years after the events, Stephen King wrote the horror novel It, about the famous murdering clown Pennywise. And a scene in the novel, as well as the beginning of the 2017 film It, Chapter 2, we see a recreation, though the names have changed, of what happened to Charlie. Now obviously I'm not in Bangor, Maine. I haven't got a sewer to crawl into. But I have what might be the next best thing, just to tell you the Stephen King side of the story. Welcome to a dark and filthy underground world, the kind of world Pennywise would be at home in. So, obviously, the story of what happened to Charlie is kind of immortalised forever in It. And character names change. Charlie's name becomes Adrian Mellon. But they suffer the same fate. Adrian and his boyfriend are at a fun fair. They get attacked by a group of youths and Adrian is thrown over the bridge. The difference is, of course, is that the fear that Adrian feels recreates Pennywise into that moment. Because Pennywise feeds off fear. And at the side of the water, although Pennywise has initially helped Adrian out, Adrian's boyfriend sees the clown take a big bite out of Adrian, and the terror begins again. Let's head a bit further in. As you can see, there are a number of tunnels connected together. These were, up till recently, totally full of water. However, some of the water is now drained out, but it's still a big mess, really. In terms of the story of Charlie, what happened next? Well, the three boys, of course, are the first part of this story. One of them, after seeing the news the next day, handed himself in to authorities. The two others left on a train as quick as they could, but realising they wouldn't get far, they too also came back into Bangor and handed themselves in. Because of their age, they were released back into the custody of their parents, but a trial was set. Boys were found guilty of murder, but because of their age, there was not much they could do. They would be released at the very latest by the time they were 21 years old. All three of the boys were released within 2 years. Other footsteps. Who's been down here? This is the last tunnel. The death of Charlie spurred Bangor, Maine to become a better place. Now, of course, there are certain religions who do not accept homosexuality. So at Charlie's funeral, there were protesters with banners essentially saying they were pleased he was dead. It's similar in a way to another story that happened a few years later, one that's perhaps a bit more well known. So the story of Charlie Howard will always be linked to the story of Matthew Shepherd, a gay young man born in 1976. Two men had offered Matthew a lift home from a lounge bar in 1998, but instead they robbed him, tortured him, and tied him to a fence in the middle of nowhere. A passerby had initially mistaken him for a scarecrow. His face was covered in blood when he was found, except where his tears had fallen on his face. Matthew was 21. Once again, his funeral. The Westboro Baptist Church picketed the funeral. The two men who had committed the murder were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Why does it take somebody losing a life for things to change? Let's get out of here. Wow. Out of the depths of hell. 200 people attended a memorial service for Charlie at the location of the bridge, and they passed the bridge in a candlelight vigil. Once again, the religious idiots, not all religious people are idiots, I will point that out, these particular ones turned up and heckled them. They even spray painted on the bridge where Charlie had jumped in, "Faggots jump here." Utterly appalling. Near the bridge where Charlie was thrown, the crossing on the road is now a rainbow crossing to commemorate Charlie. There is also a memorial stone next to the bridge, engraved, "May we, the citizens of Bangor, contrive to change the world around us until hatred becomes peacemaking and ignorance becomes understanding." A memorial bench is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Engraved on that, Charlie's favourite song, "I Am What I Am." Every year, Charlie's life is commemorated by the people of Bangor. and July the 7th is known there as Diversity Day. In a few days' time, on the 7th of July, Bangor, Maine, and across the world, people will remember Charlie Howard. Obviously, I'm not in America. If there's anybody in America, or even specifically Bangor, Maine, who just so happens to stumble across this video, please be aware that Charlie is remembered across the world. What is my hope for this video? It's very different to my others really, although we did end up going down a dirty hole again. My hope is this. One, it's to celebrate and remember Charlie. Somewhere, wherever he is in this universe, I hope he knows that he is accepted and loved for who he was. Secondly, maybe somebody who throws banter about, who doesn't necessarily think of the words that they say, that words can hurt as well as physical actions, looks at this and realises that what they do is wrong. Don't go out of your way to hurt people. You can make a difference personally to people's lives. So there we go. I'm releasing this in June because June is Pride Month. So this is my last video in June, and I will see you in July, and we have lots coming up. So do take care, guys, and please, on the 7th of July, keep Charlie just up here for a few minutes if you can. Take care. See you soon.